I will call our meeting to order. We have work session, of June 8th, 2021 of the City Council, and with our HRC Chair Mara Glubka and Tasha Ostendorf, HRC Commissioner. And the topic is the proposal to ban the practice of conversion therapy of minors and vulnerable adults within the Richfield city limits. So I will pass it over to City Manager Rodriguez.
Thank you, Mayor, and welcome to Chair Glubka and Commissioner Ostendorf. Appreciate you being here tonight, and also thank you for your research on this topic and recommendation. So tonight, Chair Glubka and Commissioner Ostendorf are going to present on conversion therapy, what it is, why it is considered harmful, and a recommendation on a ban for the city of Richfield. What staff would like is guidance from the council on whether to have staff do further research. We've done a little bit, but we'd like to know if there's consensus to do further research and then to incorporate it into our 2022 work plans. So with that, I'll turn it over to you all to make the presentation.
Do I really need it?
There you like turn it on.
Does it stay on now?
Yes.
Now that it's green, it stays on?
Yes.
Okay, I can hear it, yeah. Okay, I'm a little confused, and I guess I thought that I would be presenting this at the city council meeting, but you want this presented here during this planning session or work session, is that correct?
Yes.
That's fine. But
Yes.
So
So the work session is a nice chance to have more informal conversation, and council members can ask questions, and then we would bring it back to them probably at another work session, and then potentially it would go on to a council meeting and be passed or voted.
Okay, so there is no place for me in the council meeting. This is just this, right?
That's correct.
Except Tasha is here to receive the Pride Proclamation
Yeah,
this
that's like
evening.
a separate item.
So you have to stay.
Oh, you should stay with me.
All right. Anyway, so yes, and thank you very much for having us. And, you know, we put a fair bit of effort into this. And what we're going to look at is essentially a hybrid of what was done in Minneapolis and Bloomington. So I kind of took what I liked personally from those and added a little bit of spice. And Tasha did a lot of editing and made it look pretty. And so we've been a good team on this. But so, yeah, without further ado.
I can run the clicker.
Oh, go ahead, run the clicker. But are you going to be able to run the clicker and do your slides?
Oh, that's a lot of
Because we're going to
multitasking.
tag team on slides here.
We'll see what I can put together. So yeah, thank you. Like Mara said, thanks for having us here. So we're gonna run through what is conversion therapy, give you some insight from some professional organizations and sort of walk that through, share a personal story, and then get to what we're recommending or asking of all of you. So to get started, if you're not familiar, conversion therapy, often referred to as CT, is referred to as a reparative therapy, ex-gay therapy, or sexual orientation change efforts. All those terms are in quotes because it's not really an accepted medical practice. And we'll get into that a little bit later on. It includes a wide range of very dangerous and discredited practices. The aim of CT is changing the sexual orientation of an individual to change the gender identity or an expression of an individual. So that's where the conversion term comes in. The two most commonly treated populations from this therapy are minors and vulnerable adults. So later on when we get to our language, that's why you'll see minors and vulnerable adults included in this recommendation.
Yeah, it's right at the end of this. I believe everybody has a copy of the Duluth ordinance. Has anybody not seen that? I sent a copy of that. Do you guys have it?
Or we can make sure that you get it
You
as
have
well.
the letters from out front and from the doctor.
Yeah.
But not the,
We have those in the presentation.
oh, okay, so you don't have the Duluth ordinance then.
Yeah, we can make those available.
Can you put it up at the end?
Yep. We can
Okay, that'd be great.
Cool.
Yeah, all right. As Tasha said in the previous slide, that it is not an accepted treatment, conversion therapy. It is denounced by all of the major medical and mental health organizations, including the American Psychological Association, the American Medical Association, and the American Academy of Pediatrics. The United Nations has classified these practices as torture, and so do I.
So some brief statements that we've included from the American Medical Association. So they have opposed the use of reparative or conversion therapy that is based on the assumption that homosexuality per se is a mental disorder, or based on the a priori assumption that a patient should change his or her homosexual orientation. The American Psychological Association has affirmed that scientific evidence and clinical experience indicate that gender identity change efforts actually put individuals at a significant risk of harm. And many patients who have undergone reparative therapy relate that they were inaccurately told that homosexuals are lonely, unhappy individuals who never achieve acceptance or satisfaction. And that's a statement from the American Psychiatric Association. So all three of these major medical associations have condemned the practice.
Now I'm going to tell you about Dr. Robert Spitzer. He is considered the father of modern psychiatry, and he had a lot to do with putting together the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual. I can't remember the exact what that's called, but that's a big deal in psychiatry. And he was a very prominent person in putting that together. And he was the author of a deeply controversial study in 2003 suggesting that he could help gay people change their sexual orientation. But in 2012, after 9 years of trying, he realized that that just wasn't happening in any cases. So he wrote a letter to the gay community apologizing for the harm that he did. And the quote here is, "I believe I owe the gay community an apology for my study making unproven claims of the efficacy of reparative therapy. I also apologize to any gay person who wasted time and energy undergoing some form of reparative therapy because they believed that I had proven that reparative therapy works with some highly motivated individuals." And despite the fact that this very prominent individual apologized for his study and trying to do that for so long, most of the profession, I don't know, that's not a good word to use, profession. Most of that quackery is still used by the practitioners of today.
So just some of the harm caused, again, a statement from the American Academy of Pediatrics. This therapy directed specifically at changing sexual orientation should not be used since it can provoke guilt and anxiety while having little to no potential for achieving changes in orientation. So this is not a proven therapy, it's not a best practice, and it in fact causes harm for people that actually go through it. And it's known that exposure to CT is associated with adverse mental health outcomes into adulthood, and this has been published many times over, but these are two citations here from JAMA and the APA. So going through CT has been linked to psychological distress, suicidal thoughts, suicidal attempts, depression, anxiety, social withdrawal, and substance abuse. So not only is this something that does not have any medical basis, it's also something that is actively causing harm to individuals that are exposed to it.
The prevalence of conversion therapy. It's estimated that 20,000 LGBTQIA plus youth ages 13 to 17 are subjected to conversion therapy annually by licensed practitioners in the remaining 30 states without a ban. Minnesota doesn't have a ban, even though we're considered a nice progressive place. So we have to do it at the local level. Survivors of conversion therapy have reported to Outfront Minnesota that at least 2 locations in our neighborhood Bloomington are currently inflicting this practice on minors and vulnerable adults. And as you know, Bloomington just passed a conversion therapy ban. And we don't want to be chasing those folks into Richfield now, right? The precise number of people who have had conversion therapy inflicted on them is unknown. But we do know that it's still occurring and it's causing harm to LGBTQIA plus youth and vulnerable adults.
So I'm hoping that this will play. We wanted to share a personal story from someone in our community who has been exposed to CT. I don't know if this will actually work on here. Do you know if videos play from here?
They should be able to.
Doesn't look like it is.
Maybe if I skip back to it.
This is Junior Avalos. He testified at the Minneapolis.
They made me feel like I wasn't worthy
Sorry.
enough to live.
Can you hear all right?
Can you full
They
screen
made
it?
me feel like I wasn't worthy enough to live.
Can you full screen it?
Thank you.
The first few days that I was at this camp, it was like any other normal retreat. We just had regular listening sessions. They were teaching us biology, psychology, and these people weren't teachers. They weren't licensed professionals to teach me any of this. But then as it continued, it started to getting more physically violent. We'd go on these 2-mile runs, and as we were running, they screamed slurs at us. So it pushed me back to all those experiences I was already having as a kid. At one point, they fed us rotten food, and they were forcing us to eat this because they were like, this is a lesson for you. This is what it feels like. This is what you should feel like when you are having these feelings for other guys. Another thing that they would make us do is that we had a practice of how is it that we're supposed to act like guys. And so we would practice how to deepen our voice. We would practice how to act like a man by positioning specific parts of our bodies in specific ways. Then, we get physically assaulted. We get beaten, we get put to the ground, we get punched, we get rattled around like rag dolls because they thought that these things would fix us. The other thing was that this camp was filled with hypocrisy. Like, one of the worst things that I think was happening was that, there were all these men that were claiming that they were ex-gays, that they were, that they were fixed. And at night, I would wake up hearing them coming and sexually assaulting some of the other members that were there. And we ranged from the age of 13 to 22. Like, we were just young people, like, in desperate mode, trying to fix ourselves. I left there hating myself even more because I had not changed at all. I had spent 16 years of my life trying to act a specific way and trying to trick myself into thinking that I could be a straight man. And I knew that wasn't working. And I knew after this entire experience and this entire ordeal that it wasn't gonna change after this.
So yeah, we just wanted to share a personal story while we're reading all of these kind of facts and statements here as well. So we mentioned earlier that the UN has classified this practice as torture. So they've actually had an independent
Mighty
expert.
Fix is a subscription company that introduces you to a new
YouTube has a lot
full-size,
to
sustainable,
say.
and non-toxic product every month, so you can start making the conscious living switch at a pace that isn't completely overwhelming.
There's
Here
a
are some of my
transcript
Mighty
of
Fix
Junior at
eco-friendly
the end of the conversion therapy ban,
The story is
DAC
transcribed.
as well. So.
Awesome. So they had an independent expert on sexual orientation and gender identity testify to the UN, and they actually recommended having a global ban on the practice. So it's been discussed at a global level as well. So there are private and public mental health care providers, faith-based organizations, traditional healers, and state agents that are all perpetrators of this practice. So it's not happening just in one type of venue. It's not just one type of person that is out there practicing this. And it's often supported by family, community members, and political authorities. Faith-based organizations and religious authorities in particular operate in a space that is surrounded by blurred lines, advising the family and victim, and often promoting or providing the practices alone or in partnership with others, was a statement from this report. And as I'm sure you're all aware, there's only so much that we can control in that venue, but we did figure it was important to include all the types of contexts in which this is occurring. And it's also such a lucrative business in a lot of places around the world that it'll be openly advertised as a service. So there is a monetary component to people who are making money off of this practice as well.
Currently, there are 20 states that have conversion therapy bans, including, in addition to Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico. In Minnesota, a proposal to ban conversion therapy on youth only failed in the Senate in 2019. And they're going to try again, but the Senate makeup is still the same, so it's probably not going to happen. But they're trying with House File 2156 and Senate File 1871 in the current session. The Minnesota cities that have banned the conversion therapy by ordinance are so far Minneapolis in November 2019, Duluth in December 2019, St. Paul in June 2020, Red Wing in June 2020, Winona, my hometown by the way, in August of 2020, in West St. Paul in August of 2020, in Robbinsdale in March of 2021, and just last month, was it, in Bloomington. There are also resolutions and proclamations. There's a resolution in Rochester and a proclamation in Golden Valley.
So why it's important to act now, I mean, it's always important to act now, but banning conversion therapy would help protect the LGBTQI youth and vulnerable adults and their families from harmful, ineffective treatment that leads to increased rates of depression, self-harm, and suicide, as well as other mental and physical health concerns. By banning conversion therapy for minors and vulnerable adults, it would help ensure that unethical providers are not offering these services in Richfield. As Mara said earlier, there's a Minneapolis ban and now there's a Bloomington ban. So when you think geographically, it's kind of surrounding the Richfield area currently. And it will also help ensure that families and individuals can find ethical, culturally competent mental health care providers within Richfield. A conversion therapy ban would not apply to religious or individual prayer practices that are provided free of charge.
And we've gathered up a few statements of support, and you can refer to Monica Myers' letter that you should have all received a copy of, because we only included a couple of excerpts from it to fit it on a slide. But I'll read those. Youth deserve a chance to experience life as they truly are. We should be supporting practices that affirm and support LGBTQ+ youth to live big, bold lives as themselves. Although parents mean well and want what's best for their children, we know that we must take a stand against conversion therapy as its detrimental effects could leave lifelong damage. As staff of Outfront, we have met survivors of conversion therapy who are now in later stages of adulthood. The post-traumatic stress from experiencing this harmful practice has led them to require years of mental health support and still affects a multitude of aspects in their lives.
We've also collected a statement of support from Dr. Elizabeth Koffel, who's a practicing MD right here at Allina Health in Richfield. And she writes that she wanted to be clear that there is no medically accepted therapy aimed at changing a person's gender or sexual identity. The APA's 2009 statement that we referenced earlier against sexual orientation change efforts was based on a review of data dating all the way back to the 1960s and 70s, when it had already been shown to be ineffective and harmful. For youth or vulnerable adults specifically, the concern is multi-layered. There may be family conflict, loss of financial support, or even housing if a youth refuses to go along with parent-mandated sexual orientation change efforts. And then there's emotional harm of being told that there's something wrong with you. Compared with heterosexual peers, sexual minoritized youth have increased rates of victimization, depression, suicide, substance use, homelessness, sexually transmitted infections, and unplanned pregnancy. They are more likely to be bullied or assaulted at school and to miss school because of feeling unsafe. These health disparities are not intrinsic to sexual status, but rather are related to stigmatization and lack of acceptance. We know that strong family and community support, as well as higher self-acceptance, are associated with higher resilience and lower risk of adverse health outcomes. In order to maximize the health and future of our LGBTQI youth, Richfield should ban this harmful and medically ineffective practice.
And you all have a copy of the full letter from Dr. Koffel, and thank you to Mary for contacting Dr. Koffel. And there are, as you can see, there are several colleagues that have signed on to it as well. Now we've got a couple of statements of support one from Andrea Jenkins, the Vice President of the Minneapolis City Council. We must ban the cruel practice of conversion therapy. It doesn't work and serves to stigmatize and further isolate those who are exposed to it. Please follow the lead of Minneapolis, St. Paul, and Duluth and end this damaging practice now. And then a thank you again to Mary for Reverend Ben Sandin. Is it Sandin? Senior pastor of the House of Prayer Lutheran Church in Richfield. As a faith leader in Richfield, I fully support the Human Rights Commission's efforts to ban conversion therapy in Richfield. All people are loved by God and made in God's image and should be fully accepted and included for who they are. The idea that LGBTQ people need to be converted or changed is against God's creation. In particular, LGBTQ youth and vulnerable adults should not be subjected to this inhumane, harmful, and ineffective process.
We also received a statement of support from a family and parents of a transgender daughter, and they wrote that they fully support their daughter and all children like her. Studies show that transgender children who are supported by the adults in their life go on to lead a full and happy life that is comparable to their cisgender peers. All trans and LGBTQ+ youth deserve to have this chance at happiness and fulfillment. Conversion therapy is cruel and has the opposite effect. It can cause long-lasting trauma and self-doubt. This leads to depression and thoughts of suicide, and they write, "Please ban this harmful practice."
And as a little bit of added information about Dave and Hannah Edwards, they had a child attending Nova Classical Academy a few years ago, and they didn't take care of their kid, so they ended up suing, and they won a $120,000 settlement. They're both educators as well. Our recommendation is a city ordinance banning conversion therapy. It is the recommendation of the Human Rights Commission by a vote of all of us voted.
It was unanimous.
We voted unanimously. I don't remember what day that was. Was it last meeting or the one before?
Last meeting, one before.
And that doesn't make sense. Practice of conversion therapy on minors and vulnerable adults by licensed providers be prohibited within the city limits of Richfield. We are proposing that it be made a civil offense rather than a criminal offense. Consequences for violating the civil rather than criminal offense should start with a warning, followed by tiered fines for repeat offenders. Hopefully we won't have any, hopefully. It will be necessary to decide the fine amounts, and this is something we want to have a talk about tonight, and how it's going to be administered. Where and how the ban will be administered and enforced. We seek the advice of the council with those items.
And there's some other resources in the packet as well that just have some things that you can check out. And then there's a long list of references as well at the end of the packet.
Yeah, the references are just hyperlinks to the sources of what I used to make the slides. So, with that, do we have questions?
Thank you so much for that presentation. I'll open it to council members for questions or comments that they have. Councilmember Supple.
First of all, I wanted to thank the Human Rights Commission for bringing this forward to us. I think it's very, very important, and I would support that we would move forward with some sort of ban. I don't know what the steps are, and I'm sure staff will help us with that.
Thank you, Councilmember Supple. Other council members? Councilmember Whalen?
Thank you, Mayor. I would echo that, both thanks to the Human Rights Commission, thanks to the community members and groups that wrote in support. I was deeply disappointed that this didn't move through at the state level back in 2019 and doesn't appear to be moving this year either. So yes, I think this is the right step, and I think precisely for, as you stated, because our neighbors are doing this, I would hate to be encouraging them to come here by lack of action. My main questions, and it was helpful, the statistic about I think it was 78% of people experiencing this are youth, at least according to one organization's research. So I think this would address most of it. Is there a strong reason to not just make an outright ban on this practice for anyone?
For everybody?
Yeah.
Well, you run into freedom of religion a lot. I think it's
Okay.
probably the biggest reason that it would be difficult to do it for adults.
Yeah.
And that's also the reason we're seeking civil penalties rather than criminal, because that's you run into that. We're not targeting pastors and priests and people that counsel their flock, We're after the licensed providers, the people that are doing it as a profession, so to speak. And we're after fines, and I would like to have the biggest possible fines that we can get. In Bloomington, I think the biggest fine that they can mete out is $2,000 or something like that. So I'm kind of hoping Richfield can be a little beefier with that. I don't know. So we're probably gonna need the attorney, the city attorney for that one. Well, you're an attorney though, Simon. Do you know about that? About what kind of civil penalties we can inflict for this torturous practice?
I don't know what I would have to defer to our city attorney. I don't know if there's a range
Okay.
and also the city attorney doesn't like it when I try to practice law from the dais.
Yeah. And I would just add that it gets a little, from a legal standpoint, it gets a little sticky when you start looking at the rights of adults, unfortunately. Once you get into the adult world, it's sort of, you get
Yeah.
different requirements around what can you do with yourself and your person voluntarily as an
Yeah.
adult versus
Yeah.
the rights of minors and vulnerable adults.
I actually personally, even though I'm really against conversion therapy, I think that an adult, if they want to torture themselves with conversion therapy, that's their business, you know? We're only looking for, you know, the vulnerable adult piece is kind of important too, because we want to make sure that people that don't have legal authority over their lives aren't at risk of this practice. So, where were we?
Thank you. Other questions from council? Did you have one? Hey, Councilmember Hayford O'Leary.
Thank you. Yes, I also support banning it. As somebody who was a gay teenager myself, I fortunately had a supportive family, but I imagine how much harder that would have been had I been subjected to something like this. I would prefer to see this on a state level, but given the situation we're in, I think it makes sense to do it at a local level. And we have done that in the past, like doing a domestic partner registry prior to gay marriage being legal. So I support that. My only question is, the religious exception is broad to the point where it almost seems like probably one of the most likely sources of this is still allowed. And I understand, obviously, we have constitutional protections on the right to practice your faith.
Yeah.
But if any city addresses that or limits that in any way, I would like to look at that and see if there's a way to do that. Obviously, we can't target any particular faith, but if there's any way to limit it the same way we would whether it's a religious origin or secular, I would prefer to do that. But
Yeah.
I support some form of this, and I guess I'm hopeful that for staff it won't be a super heavy lift. I would think we can probably mostly just copy and paste, but maybe I'm overly simplifying the policy process.
And that's exactly what I'm thinking personally. I mean,
Yeah.
that's why I provided the Duluth ordinance. The only thing we need to do is add language to cover vulnerable adults, because they didn't cover that. But otherwise, it's a simple thing. Did anybody have a chance to look at that, at the ordinance from Duluth?
We can follow up and send the ordinance from Duluth.
Well, but I'd like to propose that we briefly look at that. Take a couple of minutes. Oh, there it is. There it is.
Oh, there it is.
Yeah, so I mean, at the top, there are 4 findings. You know, it's why we're doing this. And then below that, we've got definitions, and we've got 6 definitions. And the definitions here are what the definition of conversion therapy is, what the definition of gender expression is, gender identity, defining a minor, defining a licensed provider, defining sexual orientation, and then I added in on my page only, number 7, vulnerable adult. A definition is anyone who over 18 who has a legal guardian. I don't know if we need to change the wording of that, but that's what I put. And then in section C, it simply says that there are prohibited practices. It shall be unlawful for a provider to provide conversion therapy to a minor or a vulnerable adult, is what I want to add. Violations of this section are punishable by fines not to exceed those set in accordance with section. That's Duluth stuff. So those are things that we need to work out with the city. But it's very simple. It's just 2 pages. We want to do this. Here's the definitions. Here's what we want to do. It's very simple.
Yeah. And I don't know if you have a hard stop right at 6:45, but I think that's what would also be most helpful for us going back to the Human Rights Commission, is to have a good understanding of what is the process that we have to do to move forward and how can we be helpful, just so that we know exactly what to do.
Yeah.
Yep.
And the other thing that we want to do is decide who would administer it on city staff.
So-
Does anybody have any thoughts on who could do that? Is there somebody that has, that can have their duties rearranged to, you know, maybe they give up something to somebody else and then they take this on, or?
So Chair, I'll wrap up with my final comment. Oh, did you have a comment to Councilmember Supple? And then we can pass it to staff to talk about the next steps, and then we can close it out from there. So go ahead, Councilmember Troutman.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you both for doing the work. And I just feel like it's appropriate to acknowledge that it's not just this work, that's particular kind of labor, because it's not in no context. But it's been a few years since I've looked at the statistics, but I think last time I looked at the FBI statistics, at least 24 hate crimes where LGBTQ plus people were murdered, or people that were perceived as LGBTQIA plus were murdered for identifying as not straight or cisgendered. And so it's not just like this is a policy that we're thinking about, but we're thinking about this in the context of this is one trauma in a broader context of you say unequal treatment, but that's not even the unequal treatment, just real oppression and dehumanization. And I just want to recognize that and thank you both for bringing this forward. And I did, as I reached out to folks, and I reached out to a friend of mine that was a counselor that was open and affirming and just wanting to be like, well, what do you think about this? And she raised some questions and concerns, some of which you addressed, which is, well, what if people have their own goals, or if they're bisexual, but then maybe have like a more cisgendered expression, would that be limited? And is that distinguishable from CT practices or not? And so I thought those were good questions, but I think you answered some of them, I think, already, and so I would be supportive of the ban. Like some of those things are crimes, and I would be supportive of calling them crimes and identifying. Sometimes you need additional laws. It's like it's already a crime, so we don't need to. No, we need to actually call those things out. I would be supportive of that. So I think I still have a couple of those smaller questions, but absolutely we need to support this. This is not something we want to happen. We want our kids to be safe, and therapies like that do the opposite.
Anybody here, feel free to shoot any questions to me by email. Yeah.
Thank you.
Make sure
Thank you both.
And I guess we got to quit now. Is that right?
I'll share my comments, and then I'm going to pass it to staff in terms of walking through the next steps. And then if you want to, I can pass it to you before we go to staff if there's any final comments you'd like to share.
Yeah. Well, Tasha and I both want to challenge the city council to get this done before the end of the year, if possible. I know you talked about putting it on the 2022 work plan. Is that right? Did I hear that?
Correct.
Come on, we can do better than that, can't we? This should be simple. Cut and paste. Come on.
Thank you. Well, I'll just share my feedback and say that I am absolutely in support of passing this ordinance in our community as well, for all the different reasons that our colleagues here on the council have already shared. And a huge thank you to the two of you and to our Human Rights Commission for presenting this to us and doing more research on this and making it very easy with showing us what cities and what the ordinances look like. So I'll pass it to the City Manager Rodriguez to just talk about next steps, and then I'll close this out.
Thank you, Mayor. So just to summarize what I heard a very strong yes that you would like staff to further pursue this. I do think there's further research to be done. I really appreciate all the research that you have done. There are quite a few communities that have passed it and have ordinances, which is great because we have examples to go to. You've raised some questions. One of the questions is, are there any cities that are limiting it for religious institutions? We can certainly look into that to see if that is possible. And then, Simon asked for some questions just to what exactly are the limits of the ban? And I think that's something that we should also research. And I think I'm missing one other question, but I have it in my notes. And so I think there are things that we do need to. How big?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
We need to find out
The
through
limits
city
of the
attorney.
fines, and you're advocating, HRC is clearly advocating for the largest possible. Also, how do we enforce this? How do we enforce it well? So there is research to be done. I think it's better that the city roll out a ban that is effective than to do it quickly. And I do think that incorporating it into the 2022 work plans is reasonable. I don't think we can get it done before the end of the year. We can certainly try. We have not done talk to the other cities to do the research to even get the staff hours that it would take. And of course, we're gonna have to have the attorneys involved as well. So we'll have those conversations and we can bring an update back to the council. Again, I'm confident we can incorporate it into 2022. I don't know that we can get it done by the end of the year because COVID disrupted a lot of the 2020 and 2021 work plans, and we're doing catch up on all those things. And we're about to embark on strategic planning, and I'd like to do that well as.
Well, I'd like to offer my assistance to get it done.
Yeah,
by the end of
anything
this
that we can do
year.
to help.
Anything that we can do to help get it done this year,
Mhm.
we're interested in doing that.
Thank you. And then in terms of the follow-up, so I know staff have to go back. There's a couple things that we want to look specifically at, but how can the Human Rights Commission and the council be updated on kind of what you found, not the content, but kind of when it will come to us again with more information?
Yeah, and I think, I mean, this has an equity element. It also has a public safety element in terms of the enforcement. And so public safety isn't here tonight. And again, we don't have the hours and the cost estimated. I don't know if our equity administrator has an answer on that.
Well, I have definitely been in contact with the other cities. I'm waiting to hear back. I'm gonna be following up some meetings. And it was definitely more on that implementation side as to what that process looks like, how long it took them to fully incorporate this. So hopefully in the next few weeks, I'll be able to get some responses, especially from Bloomington, who just passed it in April.
Yeah, if you need any help to get at the Bloomington folks, let me know. I know them.
Thank you so much.
And can that just be an update to the Human Rights Commission to let them know the status?
We can definitely do
Great.
that.
Great.
Mhm.
Excellent. Any last questions before we wrap up? Councilmember Hayford O'Leary.
I guess mainly a question for staff. Given the consensus right now, but obviously the timing to do an actual ordinance, is it appropriate to express that at this stage, everyone is in support of a ban in the future? Or at
That the
this work-
council is supportive of the ban in the
Yeah.
future? I heard consensus that you want us to do the research. We don't have a proposed ban to give you the details on.
No, I understand that, but I'm just thinking if there's a possibility of providers fleeing Bloomington, to be clear that this is a pending issue and where the council stands right now, on at least the concept of a ban, if not a particular ordinance. I'm just wondering, maybe messaging that as individuals is helpful to just be clear
Councilmember
where we're
Whalen.
headed.
Oh, sorry. Sorry about that. Councilmember Whalen, sir.
I was just going to ask, and maybe a more short-term along that idea. I saw that a couple cities had proclamations or something of that nature. I mean, could we, I know it's not like legally binding, but could we, I guess, and same question as Councilmember Hayford O'Leary, if other council members are supportive of it, could we have a proclamation sooner while figuring out the details of implementing a full ordinance?
Okay with me.
Yeah, I think that's fairly easy to pull together. So if there's interest to pursue that and pass a proclamation and then while we're doing the research, I think that would be fine.
Would that be something that we'd do? Because we do proclamations a lot.
Yeah, we'd be happy to write you one if that makes it easier.
Yeah.
And we do have the language from other proclamations like Golden Valley. So
Right.
that's one piece of information that I already have. So
Yeah.
I can definitely work with HRC and with you to
Sounds
put
good.
that together.
All right.
All right.
I will adjourn our meeting. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you for presenting.
Thank you so much.